The magic school test isn't coming up anytime soon. Thousands of students lined up in a single line across the entire training field, ready to face their challenge head-on. Romy, the proud teacher who holds rank 6, let everyone know she had no limits to how powerful she was when she created a precise magical shield around herself. She pulled off many tricks with her magic. The students in the weaker classes hope their journey leads them to a new level, but there's no sure way for anyone to get there quickly or easily. They must wait and watch others climb up the ladder of success. It was now her turn. You're a noble family member with 0 training, and your school sits in the lowest tier of all classes. Everyone else who joined him already knew he wouldn't be able to cast a spell anymore. As soon as he pushed through the crowd's walls to get in, everyone assumed he'd only done this by pure chance. But when he performed both forms of the attack, everyone went silent, because only people from the very best schools could handle it. And then he pulled out a surprising twist. The boy struggled so hard because the exam paper was too hard for his classmates to crack open easily. No one could believe he really tried to become a freaking alien beast. But the spell didn't finish when it touched form yet. Everyone was already jumping for joy as people whispered, "Oh wow, a commoner could do something so hard in such a long time." And then they asked what the magician had said. The little boy stood there quietly for a moment before trying once more. The energy surged with such speed that it seemed to explode in an unexpected manner. The first day was a whirlwind where the boy built an incredible wall of 144 faces, and everyone for months tried to figure out how to build something even bigger. The crowd began to scramble about, unsure whether that young man was even of their own birth or a common folkman they'd heard rumors about. He didn't even realize the hard truth. His parents weren't from a nice, wealthy family. After being abandoned by man while still a baby, he grew up raising himself like a grown-up son right there in the barn. The little boy named Arian Sharon only dreamed of learning magic because his parents left him alone to build his own castle. It was a thrilling adventure as my father, Arian Vincent, led me on his first journey through the vibrant city of Toria Creus. Shireen wandered into the bustling bookstore after her dad handled all the heavy business. Yet as soon as she saw the shopkeeper's face, he slammed the door shut and shoved her away like nothing had ever happened before. No matter where he headed, he felt like an invisible shadow being dragged away from his home by a relentless swarm of police. And then he slipped out of the office in a flash, disappearing right into the shadows. The thief stepped from the shadows and immediately grabbed the slipping shoe after hearing the sound that drew his eye. He pressed his ear tightly against the wall, trying to hear a magic lesson being taught by someone on the other side of the room. The boy asked himself if he'd ever learned to be a wizard, and when the old man spoke in his head, he knew exactly what was waiting for him: the power of will. The boy froze mid-sentence as the mage's eyes locked onto his face, completely missing any trick he tried to use. That split second of silence left him with a choice he couldn't ignore. Shireen froze when her eyes met the top of the wall for the very first time she'd ever seen a magic academy and a mage. The mages called everyone straight to class without thinking about it. They all rushed into the room at once, skipping past the walls like a group of children who don't care about rules or waiting for instructions. Mary Alphys leads the magic school, where she serves as a 4th-rank mage herself. He stood in the dark room and whispered, "Show me some magic because I've never seen any before." Alphys got into the car and drove around in the driveway for some fun, while his mom watched him do something silly. He swung each student upward like a gust of wind, lifting them high above the floor for everyone to enjoy. Sharon slept in a perfect dream world where the stars were bright and every sound was real, but he woke up to find himself standing on an empty cliffside with nothing but the wind blowing through his hair. Shireen stumbled forward as the sky turned purple in a frenzy of panic and laughter from everyone else. He couldn't help it because he'd just seen a thing that made his heart skip a beat, and he thought about nothing else for days. It didn't matter if he was ready yet. Now the main character decides to try his luck casting magic himself. Shireen pushed harder and harder until the old man finally showed up with his answer. The little boy stepped into the spirit zone and asked his friend how many stones were inside his closed fist. She said exactly 6 when the MC looked at her, proving he truly believed in his own answer. What the heck was that? The old man told him he had to work so hard that his brain would grow wide open, letting everything around him become a living part of himself instead. It felt like a lightning strike that hit him in the face as he ran toward the door. He stared down at the floor for a moment as if waiting for something important to happen, then slowly opened his eyes to find that he was actually just listening to how the world kept moving around him. The old man whispered his prediction aloud as he stepped back, leaving behind a confused boy who couldn't believe what he'd seen. He was rushing home when he collided with a group of bullies and got locked in the corner, watching their faces turn red as they laughed at him. It wasn't until the very last second that someone got beaten up so hard they were unconscious that she appeared out of nowhere and turned into an angel to save them. He wasn't expecting the girl to be so bad. Yet when she hit them, he ended up getting beaten up even more. She stepped forward like an unstoppable force after the fight, her voice trembling as she declared, "I'm not going to make you a slave. I'm going to use you to hurt me." Even though everyone was laughing at the same time, the MC felt a sinking fear inside him. The loud scream of "No, God!" broke the silence as the crowd gasped, knowing that this sound had no meaning for anyone else and terrified everyone around them. And yet, even then, the ice inside him began to melt like a frozen river, turning into spring. The girl stumbled into the spirit zone from nowhere, only to see how vividly her own teacher had taught herself. He slammed his fist against the wall and threw a cloud of invisible power straight up, sending people soaring past the ceiling while they crashed onto the floor with their bones shattering in a dramatic finale. Amy stared at the door and demanded, "Who are you?" The crowd began to close around her, and she sprinted forward to escape the exposure. Shireen was shouting after her dad when she realized how deadly the world got to everyone. Amy steps out of the car and lands right at the door of Carmi's mansion, seeing the high society people already there waiting for her arrival. A little boy ran past the house and told his dad he had beaten the neighbors. He barely moved his head at all and muttered that the girl had been hurt simply because she forgot to come back from school today. She sighs and shakes her head as if the heavy lecture had finally been a dull day of boredom. Her father keeps asking if she will ever get a chance to be her own person because she's still way too careless. Amy's heart sank as she climbed into bed, feeling the weight of a promise that would never be kept. He'd warned once again that one day someone might stab her in the back, and it had stayed with her forever. She pauses for a second, then looks around at the magic school with a curious smile, before asking to see someone who might know something special about it. He could say yes, and then she's going to need a little more talk about what the hell is happening. The snow settles over your hero's cozy house, but here in the warm kitchen, my little sister watches with wide eyes as she helps her mom pack up their favorite toys for a snowy adventure ahead. Father calls out for him in the forest while his mother says her son has gone down a tree to cut wood. The loud noise of the storm makes him jump out of bed. He rushes to his father and whispers, "Shush," as he steps out into the cold night. He walked through the woods and suddenly remembered the bright spring day when he first brought that strange bird, Chirin, inside so they could have a real conversation. In the past, he almost gave up trying to save his life, and even now he knows that a strange feeling is beginning to take hold somewhere in his chest. Now, our brave hero steps forward into the tall forest, gripping his mighty axe ready to fight for justice. He stares at the tree in his hands and says, "Oh no." He was just chopping down a sapling because he had a terrible spell gone wrong last week. Despite knowing very little about magic, his eyes never leave his past when he tries to see through clairvoyance. He was able to feel every detail in the air and see every shape as he looked down at the tree. He noticed something glowing faintly inside the box, even though he didn't understand what was happening. He swung wildly across the room as he saw the bright spot. The moment the heavy axe struck his shoulder, he suddenly knew exactly what to do next. The old man thought he might drop a fallen branch into the air with one mighty punch, but then realized that nothing could have happened unless someone else was watching and telling him it was impossible. He looked down into the shadow of a distant tree and didn't even realize his eyes were staring at something right before him. To him, it looked almost like a bolt of lightning. It feels like our hero finally got a nice, easy win after all those hard odds, like that perfect shot from last Tuesday. And so he realized that success didn't happen by accident. It came down to hitting the precise spot on the map every single time. He spent another whole day chasing that same mark until his heart sank at how hard he had to work just to find it. It felt like a long spell was about to end when he suddenly remembered what he had said, so he kept repeating the words in his head until he finally saw them all at once. 3 years have rolled by, and now the old boy is a grown man who can't play anymore. You never truly saw him look at you with those eyes, but when he reached for the stump and made that single sharp move to trim it away, you felt as though he had already done the heavy lifting inside your head. He nearly forgot the moment he got home after a long night of meditation. No matter how many hours have passed, even the chaos outside keeps keeping his heart beating at full strength. The trees whisper as he steps into the woods where the worms dance and the roots drink like thirsty friends, yet his ears catch the whole scene at once, causing 5 hours to fly by. He hears his grandfather's final words and wonders if that moment of silence opens a door to something far stranger than what he has known yet. He paused at the door and turned around, his eyes wide as he realized something strange was happening right before he could say goodbye. He runs outside and stumbles upon a carriage with white horses, leading him to believe that guests must be coming. He enters the room where his parents are sitting quietly at their table, flanked by a butler and a very important man from the Ogent family who serves as their official assistant. Tom is the name of our hero. Our hero doesn't even know the servants of such a high lord are walking in. Tom rushes to check on him right away, asking many questions about his skills, like if he really knows reading, and noting how young he looks as well. It was strange that a young lumberjack would be such a sweet and kind guy. Tom says, "Should I go into the library with you?" Our hero hesitates, then hesitantly adds, "No, please don't," because he needs a quiet place to read without distraction. This job lasts 2 years. The porter does the heavy work, so our brave hero and pretty butler make sure everything stays tidy. The librarian immediately turns her attention toward a mysterious case at the top of the library building, ready to check out a tome about magic that her own heart is holding back from sharing with her family. If no books stay in the room, then no one will ever know a single one is gone. And if that occurs, everyone in the family might die too. The good news is that he finally got to see them, but the reality was far worse. Those who worked for him now put every part of their lives in danger. Tom whispered a sad secret that made earning money in the ordinary world feel like walking into a trap. So he gently told Vincent to send him away to find something truly amazing. Vincent sighed as he realized his son had finally found the key to their future, knowing exactly how much more time was left for them. Tom starts laughing and asks, "Do I really believe that?" But he's more than a bit surprised. He probably just wants the money anyway. Vincent leans into the room and pulls a card from his pocket before Tom even sees him reading. He knows the kid has great talent, but the sheer pressure of the job is making him doubt if he'll actually handle it. So when Vincent got mad, he asked his son why he had lied to him even though he truly loved helping him. It reminds me of what my dad used to say when he was young and lost his mother. He remembered how he taught his kids some new tricks while playing a game together. By age 6, the boy had already mastered reading and looked remarkably like a nobleman. Yet the most striking thing about him was that he possessed a razor-sharp intellect. Vincent often wondered if noble blood was running through him. He constantly thought, if his little boy came from a noble family, it would be very likely he would make it to great things. They were truly humble, and Vincent only knew how to chop wood for his own survival. He turned his head in terror as he saw the boy begin walking down that exact same hard road where he had been born. It felt like a shadow on the edge of his world. So Vincent lets out a sigh as he slides down the wall toward the butler, whispering that his smart, clever son could handle it all. Vincent said gently that he wasn't seeking a single penny. The old man stared at the empty chair and felt a terrifying emptiness in his chest, knowing that nothing good was coming along. Tom sits down with his hat on and whispers, "Well, nobody else wants this spot, so I think we shouldn't talk about it." Our brave hero steps forward, declaring that he will take charge, leaving Tom shocked and his father standing by to object. Tom ponders whether it's real, knowing that even a tiny whisper could shake him and his entire family to the ground. Our brave hero told us all it's fine, but the truth is the guy himself wants to do it anyway, and he'll never say anything bad about what happens next, even when things turn out badly. Tom looked up with a grin that didn't match the commoner's eyes, knowing the boy had already changed his mind so soon. As soon as Vincent shouted, "Why did you agree?" Tom knew the truth. Once inside the estate, they couldn't go back out until the job was finished. So the nobleman got mad that everyone was throwing away things and blamed himself instead of taking full responsibility, saying yes, but refusing. Instead of making a quiet scene, our hero cries then smiles right away because he feels that to him, his father gave him something truly special. Vincent hugged his father, and the heavy cry that erupted from him wasn't sad, but a terrifying fear for what was happening next. Soon, his father tells him to wait for his mom, and that's exactly what he does as family boss. He's telling his son to return whenever possible so the family doesn't have to leave. At that moment, Vincent pauses and thinks deeply about whether he has finally completed his job as a father. A week after the journey began, the carriage finally arrived to take us back home. At that very moment, his father signed a contract and handed him over to take the job. They snatched the paper from his hands and hurled him forward, launching him straight into the carriage as if nothing was wrong with him. The heavy wooden door creaks shut as the coachman takes a deep breath before he begins to talk about his sharp awareness. Even though our hero couldn't see them anymore, he could hear them still weeping inside his head. He pulls back from the people before him, knowing that time will not spare him anymore. He has just one moment to change fate or end it in a way that matters. He couldn't figure out how long he'd last in a world full of superpowers. The tale begins when you step into the kingdom of Tormia, a mighty realm where noble families like the Ogent family rule supreme. They are royalty, and they come from a proud warrior lineage who has forged the finest swords in history for generations to come. This legendary old guard is now also a skilled swordsman, yet his power level behind him has fallen to just a 4th place in the line of battle. In short, for all he cares, this entire lineage controls the streets and buildings above them. The coachman led us to his home on the way. When we emerged, he asked if we were frightened. The locals called our house monsters, yet as we walked deeper inside, that fear slowly faded into reality. He stood stiffly in front of the Gent family, where the second-rank nobles sat quietly in their own world. The hallway was full of things that belonged to butlers, their tidy rooms, their kitchens, and even the cozy place where the heroes slept. The butler, who we've already been introduced to, was now taking us all the way to his room to show us around. The librarian led us through the dusty halls of the main library before taking us to a quiet corner where we finally found our way home. The butler kept whispering while his eyes never left the floor, because the books in our hall were destined to go somewhere even more holy than our own sanctuary. Until then, our hero's job was simply to sort them out each week. Every morning he'd collect the books from the garden and pile them into one big crate until noon, even when it got dark. He worked hard all day, but couldn't leave without a permission slip, so his boss always gave him a form with strict house rules before starting. Timon, having heard all the planning before, realized that this opportunity was so valuable it demanded his full commitment. What was the first hurdle to overcome when the time came? Tomorrow was the clear answer to that question. It was only the next day when our hero realized he was wearing a butler's outfit and his task was simply to sort the books by author. The sorting standards still needed to be the same for everyone. A book about swordsmanship can actually tell a different story depending on who reads it and how they look at it. One individual could treat the blade as a specialized weapon in their advanced swordsman's repertoire, while another simply tosses it into the general store's pile of everyday tools. Building up this world, we found out that every single thought links together like a never-ending chain of thoughts. It connects everything with a history line that always links things together. So when history builds on itself, we actually get more knowledge. You get smarter when you know history. So if you read 1,000,000 books, there's still only 100,000 that are real history. The hero set out to become a magician because reading the books was his only way to achieve that impossible goal before time ran out. He quickly realized that a deputy headless might have arrived, so he pressed himself against the wall to stay hidden from the unexpected threat. Tamarin quickly said, "Our hero is so hard-working, and I'm really keeping the clock running." Taking it very seriously, the hero stood up from his seat and shouted, "Oh no, I'm not here to make any excuses." Tamarin watched in horror as the silence stretched until he could hear only his own breathing and the weight of everything else. He knew now that no one was here to judge, even if the air tasted like regret and he had to carry the heavy burden alone before the truth came out. Our hero watched as Tamarin slowly drew the sword and pushed him back gently. Did he even realize that the man who stood in the corner had actually been staring right at his book? Tamarin finally polished up his outfit, telling the boy he had found a place full of love and making sure everything was tidy like a real home. If he looked a bit sloppy, the Ogent family might get a little dirty with it, so they were told to tidy up their long hair instead. Our hero shook his head all day long and refused to give anything away at all. He grasped that dangerous warning well and knew he would have to stare into the dark for exactly 2 more years of his life. He had to stay in his mind and not let anyone think he was careless, thinking instead that he might just tie his hair back just like his dad did. He couldn't even make sense of what a book about those 3 big powers and 7 smaller ones had to say. It felt like learning only Tormia's language alone was enough to be so hard. Yet the real question became, did he really need to memorize every single word? He finally understood why he had stopped memorizing. He now knew exactly which words meant what every single one, allowing him to apply his new learning skills whenever he ever needed them again. That night, he drifted off while staring at his books, and when Tamarin walked in with a pile of papers on the floor, he caught a glimpse of everything ruined. His eyes caught up near the book his brave hero had been fighting through all that long struggle in half a month. Tamarin smiled softly as the boy slept and asked himself, "Do I really think I can win?" Tamarin was so worried about his master's ability that he couldn't believe the hero had finally caught up to his pace. Now, the guy looks like a fool who wants to fly in space, but keeps his feet on the ground. Despite being told that time was moving slowly in the Ogent library, 3 full months had passed without anyone noticing, leaving the story to continue as if nothing happened at all. As our hero continued his quiet battle against the clutter of shelves, making things harder to find was actually becoming a lot more fun. He learned a lot about butler duties and spent every waking hour managing the intricate book records. He even tried talking to the rest of the butler crew, though some of them didn't get their books back. Books vanished like a storm that turned into an angry night, and suddenly, it wasn't just the butlers who were hurt. Their entire house had fallen silent as they watched them suffer for nothing at all. It really surprised him when he discovered the noble family had been so completely out of place in the library to begin with. Despite all these challenges, the village actually managed to thrive because ordinary people kept working hard for them. Those same common people were living in danger while the rich ignored them. So our hero felt like he was being turned into a frozen ghost to avoid making any stupid mistakes. He made it very hard to believe that his own soul was melting away inside him. And right before anyone saw him, the black-haired boy ripped his shirt off and yelled, "I'm not going to die unless I finish my training session." He looked around at the group and saw that this was the very boy who had grown up to become their most trusted protector. He yelled so loud the whole place went quiet, which meant he had actually left the training room. Then he sprinted over and said quietly to his friend that he hadn't even seen it yet. The old man stepped forward and shouted louder than he had ever before as he saw his student. The mysterious young man peered at the room's entrance with a puzzled look while trying to figure out what an ordinary boy doing so fast meant. A rough man stepped forward and shouted, "I'm the sword master. I can chop those peanuts into pieces with a single blow." As he spoke, a hero looked confused and asked, "Where are we?" "We're just playing around." The hero dropped his son right there and told him he'd been hiding all along, making the young man absolutely mad. He felt like a broken toy being pulled from under his skin, so he snatched the shirt off in one motion to shove him back into the locker room before anyone could catch him. He was trying to shake off a few more of his old feelings by beating them into himself. The master dragged the boy so hard the master's hand was almost gone, leaving his power level exactly where the family had stood. That's when everyone started whispering about magic disappearing after one day. As our hero's reading speed got better and faster. The first book took him 20 days, but after learning how to actually read well, he managed to finish 82 history books just 4 months later. It felt so right from the start, but then the world just seemed to forget what happened before. When he finally built his own solid base, everything else began to feel manageable. He had spent over 200 books to get there, and now those 600 left behind were no longer truly impossible. The more he read about magicians and history, the more certain he got. Even a scientist can't change magic from paper to glass. It feels like a magical trickery versus scientific fact. If you want to be one of those two things, you have to step out into the real world to actually see it, and that's why scientists mostly stay on their side. Oh, imagine a powerful wizard who can bridge his deep knowledge with the magic of the spirits and start a new adventure right there. The quiet moment that filled his heart with hope? Maybe he really could be a magician. The library door swung open as the youngest boy slammed his fist into the floor, shouting, "He's here," before storming inside to scream for help. The villain stared at the hero as he shouted, "I've walked through hell for a single reason, to kill you." He didn't stop being stubborn, and our hero was completely stunned by it. But the blue-haired boy kept asking whether that was truly his story. He shook his head firmly and nodded in agreement with a confident smile. He tried to climb the cliff every time, but soon his arms tired and gave way, and he started to think he might have died if he never got back on top of it. He wasn't done fighting until he finally needed to hurt someone else. That moment made me realize our hero had truly felt the young boy's rage. It wasn't just a feeling. It was something deeply terrifying to watch. The boy asked himself if he truly believed the world felt that way only because of a tiny bit of hurt. He felt so angry because his friend handed him a secret treasure to save, but now he knows the real villain might be selling that gift to get back at his partner. When the weight of everyone else's rules crushed him, he wondered, how do I make my own life fit into those rigid shapes? The boy smiled shyly and whispered a sorry excuse before turning back toward the man who had been waiting. They walked through the training yard where sword practice was taking place. The younger son decided to learn by his own very hard work. It all started when our hero stumbled and fell badly before we even saw the fight start. So instead of letting them starve while he wasted his final breath, he grabbed a bite and took the best shot in the room. The young swordsman flinched as his father stepped out from behind the table, realizing that this might be the final piece of their family's revenge. The hero still couldn't figure out why the old man had been so hesitant to call him coward. And then my little boy turned mad when he saw his daddy being kicked out of the house for letting a stranger take over the job. He looked at the boy and felt a sudden pull in his chest to take him home because he knew that boy would never get any help anymore. The man's face flickered into something intense as he spoke, insisting that no matter what his family did to him, he was never going to be treated like a fool by anyone, including the hero who stood in front of him. He shouted, demanding to take 3 hits before acting again. The old warrior stood in a swampy valley where his village's wooden sword could shatter anything. Yet he had no idea if he'd actually belonged to the Ojanath clan and whether that weapon would ever truly save him. He realized that with so much knowledge at his disposal, he could only have one more chance left before running out of fuel. The young boy slammed his hand against the wall, sending a massive red streak of dust flying toward his father's face. No one could actually figure out what was happening because our hero simply wouldn't know how. The second blow came too late. His younger brother laughed at him, wondering why he couldn't even pick up a real sword. Even when our brave hero felt hurt by a rude remark, he kept counting until the last one vanished from his count. The ghost smiled down at him as he stepped into that mysterious place where spirits lived, beginning to read the man who had waited for all this time. He turned his head and saw that the younger son had missed a step when he walked into the kitchen. The sudden snap of the steel shattered like glass as he plunged into the darkness, and then a wild, unyielding scream echoed from the shadows behind him. That final lightning bolt finally struck his head when he tried to finish the fight earlier. The youngest boy stared blankly at the man, utterly confused by what he was doing. A little girl shouted that the big rock she found wasn't painting. It was a lightning bolt. His dad was a mountain boy who spent his days cutting down the giant forest to keep us warm. When he ran out of strength, he turned to science and found out how to make lightning from dry twigs so we could survive the storms without ever being tired again. He had spent 15 years sharpening his blade and finally understood the truth. Once you've done something like that, nothing else will ever work. A sudden chill returned to the room as he thought of that day. It's hard to imagine any other person doing something exactly like that at such a young age. Back then, people saw the real gift of their family and knew that the second master was even older than everyone else. It was a wild day when he finally took over his dad's mind, so people everywhere cheered for him like kings. Ri felt so far behind his brother, he was shaking like a leaf in the wind. As the hero stared at him, the boy suddenly felt like a monster in his own body, and everything went quiet for a second before the silence ended abruptly. The young boy snapped his fingers and yanked open a heavy iron door, so loud it shook the walls. Then he slammed his fist onto the cold steel, sending a massive cloud of dust flying toward the bedroom window as he hurled the weapon across the room to silence the rest. The coach shouted that the game had finally ended simply because his wooden teammate slipped. He would have to face the real monster if we let him turn into a giant sword. The winner could finally get settled after a mere month when they had their own real swords at hand. His trembling hands shook so hard that the very moment of death felt like a real possibility, and for once his body was truly gone forever. The old man frantically urged the young man to reconsider his lesson, noting that he had actually mastered nothing at all, yet the student refused to change course anyway. He waited for this very refusal to be what triggered the month-long delay in their training. He would have figured it all out if he were truly good at the skill, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let his younger brother beat himself before even trying to run again. At home in his room, our hero sat down to read the journal and immediately felt a sinking heaviness over what he had learned about the Ojanath family. The family head had a sleek black haircut, matching perfectly with his eldest son's hair. The eldest son was a skilled 6th-rank swordsman, while his younger sister dazzled with her blue hair and musical genius, turning into an amazing pianist in the court of the kingdom. Ri's twin brother was also sporting his black hair, and he was known as a genius. And yet, Ri was still seen as lacking by everyone else. Not because of his greatness, but just because he felt so worse than his top-ranked brothers. Even with a personal mentor nodding along, it made him feel even more desperate and hopeless that someone had already beaten him enough to turn the entire pride of those who compared him to his brothers into something utterly worthless. Maybe he didn't expect the story to end with a life on the street instead of a book in his hand. He found himself staring at the ceiling in such a desperate hurry that he couldn't even take a breath before his mind slammed into something he didn't want to face. Once in the wild mountains, he learned that endurance was his biggest shield. If he could figure out a way to fight back, then survival would be within reach. But with nothing else to offer him, he took every step he could make towards safety. As if nothing else mattered, Ri kept pressing on for his 100th lap while his coach looked proud of the progress he had made. Did that strange thing happen? Because now he's working so hard it feels like he needs a new job for the rest of his life. Ri slammed his hand down hard and asked, "Did the trainer really count these steps towards your final score?" He didn't know what happened next, but his eyes burned with a mix of anger and confusion as the silence stretched between him and the coach. He took a deep breath and thought harder about what might be wrong with RYY's older brother. He was going to make a deal, even if something terrible happened after all. It was a fascinating piece of paper that Ri had spent weeks studying, and now it showed exactly how to use the spirit zone as a magic trick. The other diagram belongs to swordsmen. Everyone knows how to move their own arms, but this design pushes them toward their very edge, where the body becomes an obstacle they cannot overcome without becoming the master itself. Did he really want to test that first? He thought about feeling the exact pressure of his own limbs before trying anything else. Even though he didn't think training in that opposite kind of scheme would help his spirit zone, he still remembers the girl from 3 years ago who used such a scheme and made him feel quite shocked by it. So, even though we're not sure why he made this choice, he definitely decides to test his skills in that special place where the magic comes alive. He started his adventure by making new scars along the edges of every corner he touched. Rai trained with such intense anger that he wasn't even sure if he had a plan on his mind. His teacher kept ringing the alarm to keep watch over him. Finally, he halted RYY with his own blade and announced that the training session had concluded. He laughed out loud while Ri tried to walk away from him, but he had already decided to let go of the idea and just stay right there with him instead. Ri answered the question by saying he had no talent for anything, but rather what made him weak. When his teacher asked if he was really a genius, Ri's reply turned out to be just the perfect reason for not being one. He stared blankly at the stage director, realizing that the world had been rewritten in his very eyes for years now. And the genius moves without a doubt, pouring every ounce of heart and mind into the task that truly matters to them. But what most people fear about Ri is that the job he loves isn't easy at all. He can't stop wanting to quit when it seems like nothing comes up naturally, leaving him feeling trapped by a job he genuinely wants but has no choice in but to keep doing anyway. The teacher began his lesson and gently reminded everyone that true geniuses are often their own worst enemies. Then, as if to prove the point, Ri, who had been staring intently at the board, actually laughed with a wide grin. He smiled, surprised by the idea. He knew admitting that someone gave him such amazing comfort was the most comfortable thing in the world, yet his heart would not let him stop trying to help. He didn't have the magic before, so he won by working hard. In the end, swordsmanship isn't about throwing a blade. It's the graceful dance that makes you disappear into motion. And what happens next? It's up to us to watch how this living enemy plays out under your command. Our hero learned how to play a game with his mind instead of looking outside. He saw the fight was going nowhere, so he thought back and realized that not a single attack had come from just one direction at all. He knew his job was just sharpening the blade at the 6 corners of a single day, so he worked every night until the moonlight cut through the shadows of his own work. He practiced every single day until his hands felt like they were ready to burn out, and then he just kept moving forward one step at a time, always stepping carefully toward the next version of himself. He kept repeating his moves for hours until a single spark lit up his mind. That spark showed him that swords aren't just tools to cut things. They're power that can go on forever without stopping. Our hero had a quiet moment when he realized what was coming his way and asked for forgiveness before it got too late. He didn't regret even staying in this world, though standing right at the edge of life and death made it seem like a dangerous step forward. Suddenly, a crowd gathered in that dark arena where only their shadows were visible as lights flickered on and off, ready to welcome them home. Ri was already standing there, ready to begin. Did your hero even ask if you were prepared before stepping into the fray? It really bothered me when we learned the hero had transformed so drastically in only a single month. Ri stepped into the room with an air of total calm, knowing that even his best friend wouldn't be able to guess how he'd actually hold the blade in those final moments before plunging the knife straight through his heart. Did Ryan feel so overwhelmed that he questioned whether his cool rival actually possessed the exact same magic? He shoved the idea out of his mind and immediately got into a physical fight for sure, because it's impossible to lose. As Ryan walked into the room, we all knew instantly that the gap between him and us was real. Still, that mysterious feeling was something only a few would ever understand. You could watch as the blade traced its own course across the floor. Ryan was totally stunned how sharp Ryan's rival had been, though it didn't make him feel safe anymore. Even though our hero refused to let his fear of dying take over, the terror was actually coming from a time before it ever could happen. You might think your mind is just waiting for the next step to catch up with someone who has already flown across a gap. But if you let go of that worry and simply believe in the jump itself, then no one could stop you from soaring skyward. It wasn't just a matter of surviving the end. It was everything else. His heart beat so hard he felt like everything was going to explode if he let go of that feeling for a second. Ryan's wide eyes snapped open as he saw the dark, waiting shadow, and suddenly knew exactly what to do next. The brave hero watched as a massive storm cloud rolled over his path, perfectly blocking the opportunity for anyone to jump on his bike in front of him. He knew the secret was hidden behind thick walls, so he tried to use his tricks, but failed completely. He swung back and forth in a blur of force until his body felt like he was spinning into the darkness, every kick delivering a devastating blow that seemed to cut deeper than any punch could. The brave hero finally understood why he couldn't reach the sword in time. His heart was too slow to deliver that necessary message of courage. Ryan swung a powerful punch that sent blood flying across the hero's shirt. The flash of that odd light flickered across his face as he watched with wide eyes the moment the enemy attack finally arrived. He slipped out of the way to avoid getting hit by that flying thing, but only managed to make a few inches forward instead of falling all the way down. The big guy lost his way trying to fix his mistake when the other guy suddenly smelled like a perfect victory instead of a mess. When the brave man looked so exhausted and desperate about losing everything, Ogen asked him gently whether it had ever truly dawned on him how weak he really was. That powerful weapon was forged specifically to help him train with a massive blade, making his own attempts to stop Ryan's heavy strikes look like a mistake far too simple to succeed. Even though Ryan trained so hard that he could shatter bones for a tiny bit more strength to break through our hero's defenses, the struggle was still too intense for him to bear alone. Instead of finishing the slash at the end, Ryan swung so far away he didn't know if he was cutting himself or just swinging wild enough to hurt his own arm. The moment my hero saw that Ryan was surprisingly clumsy with his weapon meant to save him, he finally understood why the villain had been so careful. He smiled at him and realized that Ryan wasn't quite as good at fighting as he thought. So, our hero sprinted over once more, realizing his new strategy was crucial. He decided to lead the fight with courage this time. It was a terrifying silence in Ryan's face as he watched the dark draw near, realizing something huge had been about to happen before anyone could even speak. He didn't even think anyone could believe that the hero had managed to force himself right up to him. Ryan hadn't noticed the trap yet, because his simple attacks were so strong that they turned the corner without anyone watching. His heart started racing as he saw Ryan's stamina nearly vanish. He quickly found his own strength to hold him back until the battle ended. Ryan snapped. In front of him stood a familiar clone of his brilliant brother, and as he stepped into the scene, the old memories began to flood out again. His eyes darted upward as the world tilted because a twisted smirk kept him from looking down toward the ground. Ryan screamed with pure fury and declared, "I'll be the greatest swordsman in the world." The hero laughed and felt a strange urge to dive in, but he couldn't figure out exactly what he meant by that desperate jump. He looked around, nervously wondering if anyone was actually listening to him talk. But when he zoomed in, Ryan's blade seemed to blur into a shimmering ghost of speed, so wild it was impossible for his hands to catch up with it. There were so many scary attacks right before him that he couldn't stop breathing. It hit us like a thunderclap from the back of our head as the enemy moved in. We barely had time to react before it was already gone. It hit the ground with such force that a blade shot out of someone's gloved hand. And that wasn't the cool steel of our most trusted friend. The air felt heavy when Ryan found himself holding again. He didn't know how to say what this feeling meant. Oh wow. At that final second, our hero suddenly twisted his hand in a quick twist, sending all the dust out of the way like a gentle breeze before he could even make it to the next move. Ryan froze completely, staring at the man until his mind raced through 1,000 possibilities before he realized what they were talking about. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he felt like the world had stopped for an instant before he could even breathe again. But winning turned a simple fight into a tense standoff against an old man, and the moment his own ego crumbled caused every move to be just as dangerous. Our brave hero stood ready with his sword drawn for a fight against the man who had knocked him down first, before realizing Ryan was already gone by the time the moment passed. He had a plan to kill his hero, and he would never let anyone else know about the mission. Our hero asked if he was real when Ryan got in his way. He refused to let him talk, so instead, he asked himself if he would actually make it back down there. They didn't even know he died first, because it all started with him making a choice. It all started long before we even got here. So when his partner kicked him out for refusing to work hard, everyone blamed him and said it was fair. Ryan questioned whether his brave hero had lied about betraying him rather than honoring his friendship, and the brave man gave a sharp, unyielded reply. He told Ryan to consider where he'd place himself, caught up in a standoff between the youngest son and the fencing master. No respectable gentleman would force such an awkward position on a butler's hand. He pulled the car over and asked Ryan why it was so proud of him for standing up in front of his own teacher. Then, after all this time, Ryan finally saw the world clearly for the first time and truly understood what made him such a bad guy. After all that fighting, our hero collapsed from pure exhaustion, almost dead on his feet. He looked stunned and blinked as if he hadn't expected the fight to end with such quiet respect from a stranger. The cold warrior didn't face him like an enemy. Instead, he had to confront a frightened child who couldn't even hold their own. Even though Ryan kept believing he was a genius, he had never tried to mock his brother. Ryan stepped forward and stared at him directly, ready to tell the whole story from the start. Chiron blinked at the man behind him as Ryan nodded enthusiastically. Oh my goodness. Chiron's a great name, while the other guy laughed nervously. Ryan gently pulled back the chair, so he didn't have to walk over, then reached across the table with a friendly smile and asked, "Can we maybe make this friend?" In the quiet corner of the library, a shy-head butler named Unvo whispered, "Oh, my dear, I've finally cleaned up all the books, so they're ready for you." The guy who made him do such a great job was even more special after all. It has been a full year since our hero began his job at the Great Ogin Library. The book pile felt empty, so he sped up even more to finish the rest of them. He finally found himself holding only 2,000 out of an 8,000 book collection, and with every single day he spent reading beyond 3 hours, that elusive knowledge began to feel like it was getting closer. It was a moment when the sword reminded him of something terrifying, forcing him to face the real fear in his own heart instead of hiding it away. He genuinely thought he had already given up, yet the harder work forced him to keep pushing forward despite the initial frustration. A huge shift happened as Ryan started hanging out with friends by the library. He stopped looking at the books in horror because he realized his own family had never even been there to check out anything. When we walked into this place, it felt like the only true treasure had been found. Having a good friend mattered just as much. And while we were busy working there, he kept telling Ryan that plenty of useful things sat in the library because Gale and the other young master always came by often. Ryan felt like he knew everything about that big guy. Once they got close enough, Ryan's giant brother quickly understood how much softness and kindness he had always been missing from his world. He smiled at her because it was true that being smart wasn't really cool anymore. After all, he was just a gentle son who loved so much. When Ryan began flailing his hands through the stack of books, our brave hero suddenly went still and looked as though he had fallen asleep. Ryan gently pulled back his hand so the man didn't feel threatened when the book suddenly felt heavier on his shoulder. He whispered that no matter how much danger lurked in the library or how dangerous it was to try and burn it down, his heart would still be with him. Oh, look at that hero. His head is already shaking, and yet Ryan smiles with a grin so wide he forgets it's there. He won't let anyone say anything else unless the crowd agrees, because he just keeps his face down. Oh no, our brave hero whispered to Ryan that feeling completely secure depended entirely on him staying motionless. When Ryan simply nodded and admitted it was only basic drills, the leader then handed him a book from the school basement just to practice how he would handle the class later. Our hero asked why Ryan wasn't getting ready to train. It was strange to hear the boy yell about being lazy when he and his friend were already so lazy themselves. Though 10 minutes later, the hero finally made room for his friend and sat down to study hard. If it was just a lesson plan, he needed to figure out how to actually get those points. Ryan felt clearly irritated and wondered if Shurin truly needed reading as much just to become mage. The hero nodded and stepped aside, knowing his time at school was lost forever as he walked into the library alone. He read through nearly 600 history books and felt a shock at knowing more than anything else. The difference between them was almost as big as age itself. Even though they looked like adults at first glance, Shireen felt older than any person she had ever known. A young man pulled up a book and told everyone he had finished reading it, only for the page to suddenly ask who was going to win, a master magician or an honorable warrior. He chased down that elusive answer all his life. Yet when he opened the book, it rushed away entirely to talk about those glittering mountains of Artition. He found a giant man-eating tree clinging to the edge of the cliff over 6,000 meters above the mountain range. It felt like Ryan dropped the ball in front of us, telling everyone that nothing else mattered when his character finally stopped screaming. He tried hard to keep Ryan reading, but Ryan yelled that the book had no swords. The hero kept telling him not to stop, then threw him back onto the floor because he couldn't see anything on just one page. Ryan never cared about the fight. He had absolutely no sense of fairness and believed no normal person should ever be put in this position. Ryan's older brother walked in and casually declared that the swordsman would definitely be the winner. Our hero took a deep breath and bowed gently to greet the young master while Ryan furrowed his brow and asked, "How did you know?" The hero looked frozen, asking himself whether his brother had finally caught the whole truth. It got awkward when the servants started talking to their noble sons, so they suddenly pulled back and waited for someone else to speak first. Ryan clapped his hands and asked, "Why did you sound like that? Did you just win a match?" Ryan laughed at how powerful that claim sounded, though everyone else noticed the archers and mages were standing right there in a way that made the truth seem easy to see. Did Ryan have the heart to argue when he was actually discussing a real battle? Ryan paused his moment with his brother before turning toward the hero and asking, "What do you think?" It struck the hero completely by surprise. He didn't even make sense of the question, and it was even harder for him to reply. But he still knew he had to speak up loudly. He told us the magic trick was tough when a brave swordsman fought against an unstoppable wizard, because no matter how skilled they both are, the mental battle alone could tear them apart. Maybe if that mighty swordman can swing his blade right before the magic even starts to work, maybe things will totally change. A smug smirk spread across Ryan's face as the swordsman announced his victory. No question. Our hero was stunned by his own reaction when he realized his brother had pushed out that very same thought. From the moment Ryan was little, his younger brother had a secret crush on every single person who made him feel special and hated. He chuckled as he began to recount how his brave friend had discovered the ancient secret and why his hero had once read about it in a book, just like this. Our hero stayed quiet while Ryan asked him to explain why the object he held might be breaking up a mage's mind. Oh my goodness. We all saw our hero in action right away. The magic isn't about how strong your skills are. It's actually a special kind of calm you can summon to stop trouble from coming at you. Even if magic could magically drain away the water, the sharks still wouldn't be able to fight back anymore. The anti-magic spell actually worked just fine. You can imagine a world where your heart beats differently when you step into armor, because if your spirit wasn't strong enough to hold it, magic itself would vanish too. Maybe the smartest mage in the valley would find that fighting a wizard with a dragon heart bracelet is just as hard as fighting a wizard with a sword of pure magic, because even when someone has no magical power at all, they still have to fight them out there. It was incredibly tough to make this thing perfect because it was already unstable. Even Yakra, master of that odd oscillation equation, only managed to give the armor 5 gods their share of that 65% power, with every single piece costing just enough for a kingdom's entire yearly budget. So Ryan felt really annoyed when the swordsman insisted he couldn't beat him because his strength was too hard to see through, and he knew if that were true, the challenge itself had been a lie. Ryan didn't get it when his brother explained that magic itself started as anti-magic. Ryan grinned proudly as he told him the deal was easy, because everyone wanted that shiny new set of magical armor, but nobody had a choice. Even in his opinion, he thinks wizards are just pathetic fools trying to sell their hidden weaknesses for money. He thought he might have started a fight, then his friend's hero actually smiled and said, "Exactly. It is magic." He looked at Ryan as if they had been talking in a noisy room for hours, then turned to ask exactly what that frantic exchange meant. Our hero stood his ground despite the anti-magic warnings from those who tried to stop him, even though their spells were designed to keep dangerous powers away from specific areas. Even better than a shield, the spell worked great for protecting students inside their magic schools. Sure, it could have been used against mages, yet that did not diminish its value. Instead, it remained an enduring gift of wisdom crafted to serve all humanity. Ryan's brother looked very annoyed at the idea, noting that he couldn't even claim a swordsman was stronger than a wizard alone. The magic wizard spun his hat like a whirlwind and shouted that worlds of light and dark never truly agreed. He knew clearly that when the blades clashed in true battle, nothing could stop him from winning. Ryan and our hero burst out laughing after seeing their new hero refuse to let them go. The bravest man in the room laughed while pretending to be asleep, thinking he had survived the entire meeting. Ryan was so delighted that he could see his brother shivering and looking miserable as the sun set. He laughed and shouted, "If my hero's tongue was a blade, I'd be the best one ever." And Ryan felt so cool it just made him want to try something new. But curiosity itself becomes the biggest weakness. That kind of intelligence could actually help bring peace to the whole world. Months have flown by since the last event. The head of the house cheered as the work finally came out 10 minutes earlier, proving he could do better when his boss wasn't around. It took the whole library 6 months to sort things out, but then even those books that hadn't been read for 20 years were finally neatly put away in perfect order. The butler asked Tamurin gently if he'd ever truly regretted that he let this exceptional worker depart. Maybe Tamurin could have pulled out a reason to stretch his deal, but he simply dismissed it like something ridiculous. He finally stopped staring at the cover of that hardcover mystery, knowing his heart was already beating like a drum after flipping through half a dozen pages of fiction before he even saw the door open. The old man stood in his garden, watching the flowers bloom while his heart raced because he had so much joy left over from last night's party. He tried to stop himself, but the rush of happiness was too strong for him to hold back anymore. Ryan lunged forward and shouted, "Did I get enough to do before I said goodbye?" He smiled at his own solution as our brave hero finally completed all their adventures. Our hero whispered that the book was dead, so Ryan's face went slack and he couldn't believe what his friend said. He couldn't believe the news that his friend was completely unaffected by all this nonsense while he himself stood there, wondering who was actually doing the real talking. Ryan sprinted forward to hug his friend with such pure joy that the awkwardness almost swelled up, but the moment was bright enough for his hero to suggest they finally join hands and play. He'd buried his old friend's bond in the shadows, but hearing the hero proclaim it aloud felt like breaking ground, something he knew would never happen again. It turned out the only person who truly loved him was his friend. So, when his heart broke from not knowing Ryan's feelings, he felt a deep sense of regret and sorrow. He spent most of his time in that quiet room at night, and was really curious to know exactly how Ryan did all that outside there. Ryan was thrilled to tell everyone that everything was finally ready again, and the whole family had left so they could have a real party. When our hero stepped out into the dark, the massive mansion looked like a wall of gold that made him feel so scared that he didn't even know why he could finally get inside. He smiled at him and said, "Don't worry, your family will probably be home by nightfall." The silence inside the mansion felt utterly empty, making every single room feel nearly as big as his entire home. He still struggled to believe that Ryan was actually from such a wealthy family. Ryan's tiny, empty room stood alone at the very back of the big hall, looking just like a simple classroom rather than an elegant queen's suite. They sat down with their last scrap of free time and played cards together. Ryan stared at the scoreboard with a grin that felt like he could laugh all day long, wondering if someone in that hero's mind was really cheating by just having their whole personality turn into a perfect smile. Our hero told us that Ryan kept himself safe even when he played Ace of Spades. Every time he brought the card forward, his eyes darted to reveal exactly how many cards were behind him. When Ryan asked why he saw so much in our hero's eyes, his friend replied, "Observation works best when you don't lock onto just one thing. If you watch the whole person instead of a single move, you can guess what comes next." Ryan felt like his head was about to explode from all that information and from losing it again. Even though he doubted whether turning on his secret plan could be useful, the hero insisted that it actually made sense for him to jump in first, so he could feel ready for the real adventure ahead. My son ran over and grabbed that old book from the window as soon as he saw it, knowing he'd never be able to read plain history again for long. But as soon as he turned around, Ryan was already asleep by the table and had clearly slept through a full day of work. Our hero glanced at the clock and asked himself how long until everyone came home. He listened quietly as the first note of a warm piano began playing in the quiet room. A long pause later, he found himself alone once again inside that room where only one person might have been playing. It was the court pianist, Rena Ogent, Ryan's older sister, and she played the piano so well that everyone wanted to know what she did next. She looked over at him with a big question mark in her eyes as she realized he didn't know how to handle the music. He stood there frozen, hoping her eyes wouldn't catch on his face. "Is this one of the books you're sorting?" she prompted. He chuckled nervously as he recounted how he'd been collecting them all year until she already knew him from rumors and had heard he was smart for his age. Finally, she asked if he ever played piano before. The house felt like a trap, so our brave hero stayed back while Ryan shouted to his sister about her being the most deadly threat he could ever find himself. She pulled out a chair and pulled his leg across the floor, letting him sit right next to her side where he'd been learning everything about the world for years. It was so hard for him to believe she actually meant his next move right beside her when he played the piano. It turned out the best thing for her was that no one dared scold her because she had given her permission to do whatever she wanted. Seeing her so stubbornly firm, he knew absolutely that politely refusing would mean nothing to him. He's asking why she let him learn those notes so casually. Honestly, nobody else gets to sit at one like him. She pointed out exactly how many buttons she had for each key, and then he carefully read them one by one before pressing the ones that worked. She loved it so much that he even had a big shout-out. He waited a moment and asked, "Did I do good enough?" Her smile told him the truth. She knew exactly where things started. But as the second he brushed the keys, he suddenly saw her hand was in a totally terrible spot. And yet, even though she nearly halted him by mistake, he kept smiling with the most confident look in his life. She paused, but even with everything wrong in her head, the rhythm still felt perfectly correct, like a perfect copy of his entire show, just heard from the back row. He used a loud horn and shouted every time a note came, always getting better as he went along. She didn't know how she could handle this unexpected behavior. He grabbed the big picture all at once without hesitation. She wondered aloud why someone like her might have ended up working as a butler. The moment her gaze fell upon him made her halt instantly, as if a sudden force of nature had been stirred up right in front of him. He felt like he'd crossed the line too early. She turned around and saw a voice behind him yelling that she had to stop what was happening. The speaker felt so frustrated that he barely slept at all. While she jumped out of bed a split second later, he was still completely asleep. Our hero turned around and spotted his friend Chiron right away. That's the moment when he instantly realized exactly where he had been going. The girl's surprise was so big she nearly fell over when we told her our secret story, and the hero tried hard not to let them hear his own secrets instead of just being a little bit embarrassed by the news. Rian stepped forward and shouted loudly that he was Rian's true best friend. Our brave hero refused to give up the secret, while Ryan dismissed her as a petty witch who wouldn't care at all. Oh dear, our hero couldn't really figure out why she wasn't caring at all. Then the girl stepped forward and said calmly, "There's nothing wrong with him. If my brother calls a friend, that is enough." She laughed, noting her brother might be pitiful, but he always takes responsibility for his words. Then she turned to our hero and asked what he had been thinking about while playing. Her question threw him completely off guard and left him stunned in a moment of pure surprise. For the past 16 years, everything he thought he knew about nobility had started to fall apart suddenly. Ran away at the first sign of trouble, leaving her sister to wonder just how deep the peasant's friendship went while she tried to keep her heart calm. Ryan froze mid-scream as he suddenly became so cold that his eyes widened into slits, looking exactly like a monster about to devour the world around him. The older sister smiled softly and told her little brother that he felt hopeless, making her happy that he had a friend like our hero. Ryan then nervously asked why she wouldn't take the cute boy into the family, where he would be just like them all. She stared at him, surprised to see how close he seemed to offer her away in such a way. Ren tried hard to step back from the situation, pretending that everyone else was actually in trouble. She dropped the man right at his feet, slamming him hard against the floor as she shouted loudly enough for everyone else in the room to hear, and the whole crowd went silent, thinking they were witnessing a tragedy rather than an epic battle. Rian looked at the floor and whispered, "I know why she's here so quickly." Rian sank into a low hum of despair as the old man arrived to witness her, knowing she couldn't possibly know what Paradise was doing today and leaving just in time for tomorrow's departure. It wasn't just a rule, it was an official standard for archers and mages, recognized all over the kingdom and even across the whole continent. Every year, around 1,000 people took the test, but only about 20 made it through. There were also unofficial licenses. Imagine stepping into a magical world where schools are only open to people with perfect grades and no mistakes, like the Academy of Magical Theists. And suddenly, you're guaranteed to become an uncertified 10th rank wizard. But before they could climb higher, someone stole your PowerPoint. The real prize is that official badge matters just as much as any gold medal you might win. Ran his own twin brother to a math exam at 18 and claimed he knew what other geniuses were doing while his entire family backed him hard. His sister wasn't teasing him. Instead, she gently stroked his head while declaring that she'd be cooking her own dinner because the royal seafood had finally arrived in the palace. She stood up, gave a big smile to our hero, said that meeting them felt wonderful, and then checked back out to see if they were coming for another time. She pulled him into a hug, so tight, he almost forgot who he was, but then the moment she spoke made him wonder what she meant all along. He had a big moment when he realized he'd be going home before the sun came up in the morning. So he asked Rian if his sister was even dating anyone. The boy scrambled to hide the news, whispering that nothing mattered, while staring with pure curiosity at a friend who was already smiling along for the ride. He didn't even take a second to grab his weapon before the hero fell to his knees in terror, screaming that he was being ordered by someone who could kill anyone. The hallway felt alive with life as our hero sprinted forward, feeling like he'd been running from something and then suddenly found himself back on his feet, ready to run all over again. The entire mansion felt like a big party when Rian sprinted down the stairwell shouting about his brother's girlfriend right in front of everyone else. Sharon slammed the door and shouted, "I got that right," before he looked back at her with wide eyes and a furious look on his face. His quiet sister gently explained that while the servants looked unsure of their own words, she assured them all to keep those conversations at home. They said they were just kids playing in the pool, while everyone else went straight for the fish and head to the kitchen. It looked like one person was watching the whole thing from behind a corner. A mysterious stranger questioned if Rian had any guests waiting and what that little boy looked like. The news that no visitor would be allowed to enter created a mystery that made the situation feel even more dangerous. The chief butler whispered the name from memory, while Timoran immediately summoned a man to the office. Later, Rian strolled out of the house into the dense woods to practice his running skills before getting ready for a new challenge. He said he'd only practice for 10 minutes. His teacher was so happy to see him back in action, especially after that long pause. The very last moment, she lost her enthusiasm and almost gave up the game right away. Even if the teacher thought Rian might turn into a prince in the palace, he knew the only true problem was that plan. While Rian kept his eyes closed, the butler sprinted forward to whisper, "You're not alone now," before turning back toward the door. He paused in mid-stride and asked, "Who wants this?" and then waited for a gentle nod from the other person beside him. The butler whispered, "I heard my sister sent me urgent news," then warned that his temporary butler, Chiron, was in immediate danger and possibly killed. Rian almost lost control of his water, and thought his life was over when Chiron told him exactly why Chief Butler Lewis had sent reports to the family head about the young butler. Sharon sprinted into the hallway immediately before his master even finished talking, saying something so urgent it made Rian hesitate just in time for the door to swing shut. Rian didn't hide a single secret. He told Sharon, the butler, that his father must have found out about him long ago. He told his teacher that maybe he could get forgiveness from the person who spoke for him if they promised to train again in the future. His master refused to let him go. By then, Chiron had already been dragged into the family hall, kneeling before the old man, whose voice told him he must die right now. The silence stretched long and heavy as the air felt thick with unspoken anger, but no one at all really grasped how things had truly ended up in such a terrible way. Even though Timon's feet were still warm and ready to land, he knew with terrifying certainty that his new path would lead nowhere, because he couldn't possibly keep going forever. His sister desperately wanted to talk, yet her father slammed her shut because of the unruly servants and his own report that the boy had been acting too recklessly near Rian, which led the family head to ask Chiron if she'd seen the terms in the contract. He didn't want to make the world think he wasn't okay if someone said, "If you hadn't told me." But maybe just one more question could be asked instead of that final conclusion. Chiron looked up from his book and asked if he had seen Rian before. If you were the young master's friend, he pressed seriously, what would happen? It made absolute no sense why the servant didn't beg for mercy right now, yet even his sister couldn't help but wonder if that same worry clouded her view of him. The butler loved the truth, so he mocked Chiron as a trivial fool and demanded how far a noble would go to join him. Yet she held her ground just like everyone else. He smiled at Rian, telling her the simple truth. They were best friends for over a year. The family head didn't get mad because he kept his voice down. Instead, he treated everyone's quiet words like a rude insult to the Ojin people. He quietly told his chief, the butler, to stop talking about Chiron so nobody else could learn, though his daughter kept pushing for a different answer. Finally, after she spoke up, the story ended with the agreement reached. It finally hit him that the door had shut behind him. He knew exactly where to look next. Chiron loved her home more than she loved all those butlers who tried to keep the magic alive by stepping aside during a noble meeting. So when the conflict started, they couldn't step in because their whole life was built on keeping that secret safe from bad actors. Now, they thought it was so cruel that everyone realized soon that they were right about what to do. Rian suddenly exploded out of the office door. He screeched loudly, claiming he couldn't let anyone stop him from killing his friend, while demanding the exact person who gave permission for such a terrible act. Rian pulled back from his question and stepped forward to meet Sharon, who looked stunned by his sudden departure before she even realized exactly what he meant. His father once told a story about death not needing a crime, but then said that actually no one ever felt truly comfortable in their birth as nobility. Rian didn't know why that harsh life was so difficult until he realized his true comfort came from living up to family standards while they dealt with ugly issues around him. It wasn't a privilege that Rian cared about. Throwing away his friends was what really mattered. His dad told him that being big was wrong, because friendship shouldn't be like that with someone so powerful and distant. Did Rian truly think Sharon thought he was equally valued? That's the question that keeps popping up among everyone, because some people just want riches and power. Rian shook his head with a look of absolute disbelief as he stared at the news report about the wedding. But first, his dad handed him a special gift, proof that they were actually best friends. Rian's eyes snapped shut as if the floor were made of frozen ice, and then his hand flew up to lock the door behind him. If he fails here, he whispered loudly so no one could hear, it is all done. It felt like a heartbreaker when he tried to whisper the truth while the room went silent. Maybe if he were really Chiron, he would have been able to slash through his dad's brain as a breeze. But the reality was that he didn't have that kind of magic power. He smiled back at her, remembering how Chiron had looked angry during their fight and realizing that watching a movie before doing something else is often just as good as doing it directly. Rian stepped into the empty room and began assembling all the pieces he had found. Before him stood a powerful figure who was not merely his own father, but also the second hereditary lord of the House Ojent of the Black-Haired clan, serving as an official fourth-class knight. That's when Rian realized this wasn't just a battle between father and son. It was a deadly duel in disguise. 3 minutes ago, Ryan had begged his teacher to let him go because his friend might die any moment. His master asked if he meant the boy from the library. The teacher spoke softly and immediately pointed out that the boy was not an uncommon person. Rian froze, watching with wide eyes because he had never heard such a harsh comment from anyone else in this room. So when a knight crossed swords to save his friend, everyone thought he made them truly friends for the first time? He asked his teacher first about the things that really mattered for a rich man. Rian might have thought he was important enough to matter as a friend, But actually, his value was so low compared to a tiny bug that the very simple answer felt like a slap in the face. His master gently warned him about the high-pressure noble's face and told him he should stop asking questions about solving the problem. Rian knew he had to step forward so Sharon could tell him he wasn't a coward, even though he couldn't help but not want to stand still. His master looked at him with intense seriousness and understood that his student was truly honest, even if he had been quite naive. No matter how much he felt, he could still not become a great swordsman. He knew why the man trusted him so much, so he offered the blade to the man and said, "You'll be free." But if Rian wasn't prepared, he wouldn't move forward at all. Ryan accepted that day and said, "I will never forget this moment." He sighed softly as his teacher walked away, feeling that the last piece of himself was slipping away along with him. Ryan knew that this was a dangerous sword fight because if he died here, his whole life would have to end too. His dad nearly caught up with him, but stopped in time for that brief moment of laughter. Rian knew he needed proof for his dad's sake, so the moment he saw Shuren, he immediately claimed he was just his best friend to prove it. The family finally told him that wealth didn't matter at all, because noble honor was already crumbling beneath them, and they were prepared to throw away their own children just as much so to stop the family from plummeting lower still. The crowd gasped as the group shouted, "We are going to win," and everyone froze in awe before turning their eyes toward the sky. Rian took a deep breath before bowing down to the floor, whispering that letting him be part of his own family might just mean letting go. His dad showed him how to hold the weapon and said that if Shiran really cared for him, he would prepare himself to take any dangerous risk for him. He moved through the dark with a gentle, deliberate grip on the long blade. A loud crash echoed as the father's name rang out, and suddenly he didn't see the boy holding a sword right there beside him. Instead, he saw his child standing with their own weapons up, ready to face whatever came next. Rian kept his hands up and didn't even look at him, whispering a little defiantly that he wasn't actually shooting for the person in question. Instead, he was pouring every ounce of his courage into trying to stop the guy from making moves. Even though his dad didn't get along with the rest of his family, and the kids weren't exactly matching up with the richer gentleman, he just took a low-ranking servant behind him, so he could feel better than being alone among equals. Rian felt like he'd been hit with a rock and told he'd never be right about anything again. So Sharon was the smarter choice between them all, and Rian really wanted that friend to shine even more brightly in the end. The family leader stepped forward, pointing directly at Sharon and shouting about how they had made him feel special by making his son act the way he did. Rian immediately jumped into the conversation, saying no words before Sharon could even finish his sentence about protecting himself. Sharon gently pulled him toward the corner of the room and said, "Take a deep breath. Don't feel like you're carrying any more weight." He looked at her with wide eyes as she told him everything would be okay. It felt like the world was turning upside down when Rian finally said he wanted to be friends, but then Sharon told him that no one would ever want to share their lives with someone who has already chosen a different kind of connection. He'd still be alive here, but wouldn't regret the friendship that started back then. The word slammed so hard that even Rian's eyes rolled back as he cried out. He finally spoke up and told them the truth. Even if the ban was thrown, their bond wouldn't change at all. Every single person standing in the crowd felt like a genuine human being who had real emotions for all of them. No matter if anyone ever says hello to you, you'll always see people waiting for them at the door. In fact, every person there was hoping you'd come along for the ride. The family's grandpa came in after all those long days. The dog roared scoldingly when the kids got too into a fantasy scenario, but the cat found it hilarious that even little ones can do that. Sharon couldn't help but wonder what the family head actually expected when that old man rushed in to meet him before his friend even left. It felt like a sudden revelation of who General Tormel was. His own brother-in-law and Rian's grandfather, all caught up with him just as the young maid had fled. He sat down and said, "The room is exactly as loud as always. And yes, youth is indeed the very best time to live." The family head looked completely thrown off now, but he insisted nothing was wrong. This issue had already dragged the whole family's image through the mud while Grandfather Ray said not to rush. He'd watched everything from behind the scenes, and since so many people clearly had something to say, they should hear them out. Raina started at the front row because she knew this boy would be brilliant and did everything according to the rules. She wasn't surprised to see him go off on his own yet again. Shuren really didn't care about what happened next because he already knew Rian would be gone. In her eyes, it wasn't a mark of disgrace for anyone to see him act. He looked at the quiet space where he had last seen his granddaughter and turned his gaze toward her younger cousin. As Ri began his speech, he casually told his dad he wasn't good with boys, which instantly calmed his father down just enough to let him speak for another minute. And then Dad said, "It doesn't matter." And his family went absolutely mad because it wasn't about how much money or time you had to work for. Ri stood up and said clearly, even though he hated the situation, knowing that choosing his brother's friends was not within his power or dignity. He grabbed his bag and sprinted out of the room to head straight to the royal palace. Grandpa listened to the kid talk about how crazy this place was compared to his own old house and immediately decided to move. Next, he called on Timoran, the brave deputy butler who had known him since we were young. Even though he knew that servants rarely talk freely, they were still forbidden from sharing their ideas with other people because they only serve a single master and can never speak for themselves. Timoran told Sharon that he had handled everything flawlessly and was already halfway through the project. The old man stepped up to the table while his grandson, who was still at home with the child, stared blankly as the big guy grabbed their hands and said, "I don't know about that boy." Timoran smiled and laughed, knowing perfectly that Sharon had spent too much time with the young master, even though she wasn't his friend. Yet, when asked if Shireen might be just an ordinary child who couldn't sort 1,000 books on her own, he was surprised to hear nothing but the usual no. By then, everyone felt that the crushing pressure had finally lifted. It seemed that the last person standing to demand a fine was Sharon's father. "Oh no, that's exactly the moment my grandpa said, and I'm starting to worry for him." Her grandchild blinked in confusion as his dad instantly laughed with delight. Grandpa gently told her that while the two of them really loved each other, the day had to go before they could finally say goodbye. If the rumor continued spreading, his enemies would find themselves using it as a vital weak point against him. Grandpa spoke softly as he watched his family gather for that crucial certification test, knowing every member was carrying their own weight and waiting to see who would finally succeed in the kingdom's eyes. He told Chiron the right way to be a good kid, then fixed his eyes on his grandson who was standing right in front of him. Maybe he knew for sure that Ryan felt very serious about everything. Still, the grandfather paused and looked at Chiron with a mix of worry and curiosity as he realized how much weight countless lives carry just by existing in this family. He then asked the young man what he thought about the ending, knowing his hero had once taught him that true friendship means more than simply getting along. But Chiron firmly said he couldn't end it here. The news made everyone jump for joy, but Chiron laughed it off with a grin. If he turned into a burden to Ryan, he'd never even look back at me. And yet, his call for a friendship was still ringing in every ear. And because we were close, he always did what they said. Even if Chiron somehow beat Ryan and saved himself from pain, his heart would still tear apart because he couldn't take the loss. Deep inside him, he knew that giving up his best friend was as painful as letting go a piece of himself. Therefore, he chose to ignore the rejection and push forward anyway. He pulled his blade tight as his sister shouted orders for him to stop. Too late. The heavy axe crashed to the ground as Ryan Ogent, his third son of the Ogent family, slammed into the floor and shouted, "I'll be Chiron's sword from today." Father yelled out, and suddenly he saw his kid as the most obvious fool in the house. The oath that began our story in ancient times marked the start of the world kingdom Tormia, where people live forever fighting for land one another through generations. He was one of the most formidable warriors in the group and once led these lands to unite under his leadership, building the city of Tormia from their strength. Yet even though the new kingdom faced tough challenges from strong neighbors, those who lost their power could quietly hold onto their rule over their own lands, which eventually led to the legendary Knight's Oath. It felt like a big deal when everyone laughed at them because swearing to be loyal just for their ruler meant the title of noble was already theirs. Even when Ryan was still looking at the ball with a grin, nobody could make him shake his head and give up. Our hero sprinted forward and shouted, "What exactly did I do?" Grandfather looked very stern today, and if Ryan really meant he'd become Chiron's sword, who knows just why this heroic hero got such a loyal heart. Chiron caught the light and looked like a star in Ryan's heart. When Ryan smiled and replied, "The truth was that a sword isn't a judge, it's always protecting." The grandfather burst into laughter, whispering to his family, "Maybe those fools who think they can't grow are actually going the wrong way." He smiled and said, "Ryan's great, but my sword skills are terrible, so I nearly wanted to cry about how Chiron got tangled up with him." Grandpa finally stopped talking, knowing exactly what was being accomplished. No matter how ordinary Ryan was at first glance, Grandfather insisted on keeping his sword hidden for Chiron. He asked our hero to take care of his grandson, and Chiron said thank you for letting him do it. Grandpa explained that once the magic spell was set in motion, Chiron and his family could never escape the house alone. So he ordered his trusted butler to bring them right up there before they were truly free again. Our hero protested angrily, saying it wasn't even necessary at all. He told Ryan that he didn't need to do anything special. Friendship alone was enough for them both. But unlike his older brother, Ryan said he could actually tell when someone would draw people in without doing much else. That was exactly why he chose to risk everything for the amazing person we were talking about. Chiron's skin turned a deep crimson as those massive words echoed in the air once more. The air felt thick with pressure as he muttered, "Ryan needs to train hard for sure if we're going to protect him right now." Meanwhile, His sister slipped in and asked if it was actually true that he'd lost a fight earlier. Ryan didn't pause to see the old man on the floor. He just yelled, "Get out," while his wife tried to scold him about her husband's recent antics. The knights swore an oath that made everything impossible to solve, leaving the adults scrambling to guess how to handle whatever was coming next. Despite this, their dad decided to send them into the Kaizen Academy because Ryan had already told us that they were gifted with swords. Sharon gasped, but then a fierce grin spread across her face as she told everyone about his secret ability. They were genuinely obsessed and wanted her to surpass Ryan, who yelled that the moment he was ready to play with her, he would be sent back into school before anyone else could. He burst into tears when he realized his only brother was hiding from them all, screaming that she would turn into a wizard so he could wake the spirit state himself. She paused for a moment of intense thought before she could break the silence. She wondered if her brother might actually swear a promise to become a wizard before even getting his hands on the sword, because it wouldn't make him look any less like a warrior. So Ryan thought he had found a solution by telling her she needed to leave, but then he realized that was all there was. It clicked in her hand. During that final battle, our hero had pulled a spell from his spirit zone. He didn't need magic spells. He just had to look out for the signs before anyone threw them at him. She clapped her hands so hard she nearly fell over and said, "Oh my God." She actually thought this was a real trick. Sharon looked up from the floor as her friend asked if the sword could truly be strong when she focused on it so hard. She knew from school that pulling back into her spirit zone would make the blade even stronger, but seeing her hero so overwhelmed by this intense pull made her wonder how such a powerful weapon existed in the first place. She laughed at them both because it would ruin their game. So her brother took over the conversation and told them about how the old man's father had been a terrible father himself. After everything, Sharon's future really relied on if Ryan showed up for sword school. Ryan bounced up as if he were preparing for a big exam, asking his teacher exactly what was going to be the final score. His older sister chimed in immediately, saying she already had all the answers and would know everything. He finally decided to pull back from Ryan's training tomorrow and deliver a heartfelt goodbye speech in the morning. It shook Ryan's entire heart when the news hit him that his favorite teacher had vanished before the final exam could even start. Just then, the butler stepped forward and shouted, "The family has just arrived." The head of the house said proudly that his friend was ready to come out and show everyone what they were all thinking about. Sharon lit up, sprinted off at once while the butlers begged her to slow down. She barely heard them and asked them not to speak to her like some nobility since she was just a peasant. They told her she couldn't do that and could be punished for it. The quiet room was silent when Sharon finally spoke, her expression soft but firm. "I'll never let anyone know." He stepped out from the hallway and instantly hugged his parents as they took in a big, happy surprise. He glanced over them and saw that they were incredibly thin, so they had probably been sleeping all night fearing someone would never return to take them back alive. Mother cried as she said, "My husband and I are okay and have plenty to eat." Then his father asked why he hadn't come home sooner if his work was already finished. Was the family keeping him there on purpose? Chiron quickly said it wasn't like that at all. They had simply offered him a great chance. When his parents didn't understand, he told them everything that had happened. He was so shocked that he almost forgot how to breathe when his brother had asked him for an honorary sword rank after working at the local library. Did he really get the message clearly? Or was that a terrible joke made out loud? Chiron stood his ground and told the truth, while others seemed to laugh at him. His dad slammed his arms around him and whispered, "I know I'm not going to look different forever once I walk into that big gate." At that moment, Biskov stepped forward as head of the Ogent family, and Ryan and Rihanna watched from behind him. Chiron's parents could have never believed their eyes as they saw the truth. Biskov jumped up from the table to ask a very important question. Why do they treat you like that? They bowed deeply as he asked, feeling both relieved and concerned at the unexpected treatment of their friend. His parents truly understood that moment when he finally spoke the truth for them. They sat at the edge of that feast and felt like they had run out of breath before the meal finished. Even sitting there with rich food, their minds were still spinning around. Chiron's father had barely realized what an oath truly means. Even though he was shocked at how noble people treated ordinary folks with such warmth and grace, he finally turned to his tea for a moment of calm before speaking back to them. He wondered if the young lord had truly bowed so low, feeling like a stranger in his own house. Biskov confirmed it. He laughed and said the Ogent family follows a very strict warrior code, because his own oath is no joke at all. So when those people saw Chiron and his family from the bottom tier, Ryan felt his own dignity turn to ash. He told the family to stop being so mean because he knew if they kept pushing, they wouldn't even look back at him. From the side, the grandfather mumbled to himself that he had always forgotten how to listen to his own son's words. Chiron grew respectful of the Gent family because taking in a peasant was already a big deal. So instead of worrying about pride or trying to frighten people, he decided to follow what made sense for his own honor. Then, Biskov broke into action and chipped away at Chiron's soul directly without a second thought. He explained that this magical power doesn't come from effort alone. You have to be born with it. Since Chiron wants to become a mage, and Biskov says he'd help get an unofficial license soon, he even thought Ulf's Magic Academy might be the perfect fit for him. Chiron went all the way out of his mind when he found himself in a meeting room full of people who refused to accept him. So much so that it was actually quite funny for him to realize that standing straight up wouldn't solve his problem at all. The old man felt a tight knot in his chest while whispering to the little lumberjack about how it would be different if he made it all the way through. The answer, of course, was straightforward. If you walked that distance and didn't stop, you could become a wizard. Chiron stared at his father with a wide-eyed shock, though he had to focus all his thoughts on finding the school. Magic schools were actually a trap designed only for the very few who knew how to read, so commoners simply couldn't enter. The family finally found peace and comfort knowing that Ryan's grandpa was the one who solved their problem with adoption for them. His father froze as he explained that this was the only way the family could solve the problem. After talking about it together, they handed a copy of Chiron's parents' document and told their young cousin and their family there were no children. If Chiron's name were written on it, everything would be solved. They also clearly made it clear that they weren't trying to take him away. The idea of holding power in the sky feels like a dream from a book written in gold. Yet laws say you can't own it because it's too dangerous. He was so confused that his dad couldn't even make sense of the news. It made no sense for anyone to become a noble after having his son turn into one. But at least the act felt like taking away his own child. Chiron stared blankly, wondering exactly what to do next. Chiron had finally decided what to do with that thought. His father squeezed his own hand tightly as he whispered, "I can't be another child's adoptive son." Hope filled Ryan's father's eyes as he listened to her talk about paperwork. Yet he knew, even with the grandfather cautioning about life, that the path to his dream was already open and he wouldn't hesitate to reach it. He said that turning into a wizard meant swapping his parents entirely. No, that wouldn't work. He'd choose to remain a humble farmer instead. The grandpa snapped at those common folks and told them no to magic me's, but Chiron said they'd take it all for free if they didn't leave. He stood up and yelled, demanding to know why the stubborn young man kept trying to win even though success only asked for more work. If he refused to give up his dreams, Chiron realized their importance. But if those dreams truly existed, then nothing mattered at all. They were the roots that taught him how to read, and his dream was simply the fruit that grew from what they gave him. Everything he had started with them. There was one tiny possibility that would likely not beat up against every single chance he and his family had already offered himself to. He turned to his mother with a heart full of gratitude, yet she knew this wasn't the way to end it. Giving them up meant letting go entirely, just as drying out and dying would have done. It was absolutely quiet as the entire room went still. Grandpa stared at the old man's hand and wondered whether that was a moral choice or a guilty one. Chiron's dad burst out laughing when he heard the news, saying that since they were ready to do this together, we ought to start right away and bring him in now. The grandfather stepped in front of the door and said sharply, "Chiron must feel this way before anyone else can say anything." But then Chiron's dad called out and told him he wasn't his real son because the boy had never been born to his family. Chiron looked horrified as his mom shouted the news out loud, leaving him completely baffled and overwhelmed by her sudden realization. Vincent looked toward the door as he told his family that they'd never even gotten together before. Then, suddenly, someone burst in with his own story about how it all started. It never made sense for this kid to come from a noble family because, just like you, he was still his own boy and not someone who belonged to anyone else. As Biskov paused to think about that, he knew with absolute certainty that Chiron did not look exactly like his father's hired hands. Even though he was told it came from outside, the way I heard alone felt like an honest rejection. Chiron stared at the blank screen as his father tried to speak from a distance. Vincent sighed deeply as he realized today had arrived for his son. The time was finally right when a boy should have known how to do things on their own. And then the old man's voice shook from behind as he realized that even though he had never spoken to him, the boy truly knew. One person can only have two real parents at once. So why did he say he'd never ask? Because his dad is now forcing him to keep having six. Vincent collapsed, clutching his chest while tears streamed down his face as the wind screamed at him that Chiron would never leave him on this road. Chiron kept whispering that he wouldn't give up on the mission at all. He really wanted his dad to imagine a world where he was completely left out of his family's life after the 2 times he had been abandoned. Vincent wrapped around the struggling person in a tight embrace and started begging for mercy while his voice filled with an unspoken vow of never letting such a moment repeat. He told Chiron to stop begging him not to let his kid go and that the man who hurt his son was a terrible father. They knew for a fact that parents usually do this when they're working hard to care for kids. It hurts your parents when they can't raise a kid alone. Biskov stood up and stared at the screen, letting his voice echo in the quiet room before he finally said something. The boy announced that the girls' magical school had some unique plans and likely asked if his boss would lend him a hand. The old man stared at the young man and wondered how someone could even say they'd help when they were all so much stranger than anyone else. Biskov just grinned, realizing how tough anyone must be to find their own heart, because he knew his son wasn't just proof, they were the whole truth. 3 days after Ryan headed out for his fencing class, his family decided to drop by and keep Chiron's folks in their house until they were done seeing them again. Even though Chiron had finally apologized to his father for the mistake, that very moment made him realize he couldn't just stop fighting. Now, no matter what happened next, his father was still asking if he'd ever hold on to his own bravery again. Chiron and Ryan were having a wonderful time because they finally got enough free time to explore each other. But after 3 tough days, Ryan couldn't wait forever and finally decided to pack up his bag and head home. His heart broke because the master had shoveled him into a train and told him to quit fencing school if he wanted to stay in town, so he waited until the next day to try joining Chiron instead. Chiron reminded him that even though he hadn't found out yet, he was sure they would make it and decided to plan a meeting whenever they could stop for a break. He reached out for Ryan and whispered, "Chiron must be a mage because he'll become the strongest knight, the very sword that will keep you safe." She slapped him right then and there while he was feeling completely lost in a rush. The girl spoke directly to her son to keep him from losing interest in school, telling him that if he didn't care enough, her grandfather would take care of himself instead. She also paused to reassure her daughter about a grandpa who could manage everything on his own. Sharon smiled warmly at the stranger who looked so much more like a beloved little brother than anyone else could have imagined. He stood apart from everyone else, showing so much wisdom even when the pain was unbearable, because he knew exactly who to trust when everything went wrong. She said he had to keep trying while he became the hero who helped watch over his own brother. Sharon jumped onto the moving sea of her car right away and immediately started chatting happily with her small family members. He walked through a quiet alley and heard someone whispering about entering a magical place where they had to hide their secrets for everyone else to know. He handed the same warning straight to his friend, making sure everyone heard exactly what was needed. Rihanna Ogent and Chiron Arian stood shoulder to shoulder like 2 fire-breathing dragons, knowing that whatever they unleashed was about to shake the foundations of the very earth itself. The adventure moves from school to the magical world of Althea's academy. Grandfather Ogena sat at his table with a cup of tea, watching a stranger who seemed completely lost in thought until he finally spoke up. "What's wrong?" "Long ago, I had met him and talked for 5 decades before asking him about something new. But when he finally replied that he could not take it seriously, my heart broke because we were so far apart now that even a long-standing friend might think differently than 2 strangers." Ogena had already cracked him down on when they were kids, so it was no surprise he'd been caught off guard by these special deals that never stopped making. The rules don't just bend today, they're carved in stone for everyone who ever saw them. Ogen stared at his old friend who was refusing to move despite knowing the best way to solve the puzzle already. So his friend finally shouted, "Oh my God, this guy isn't a normal child," and the boy immediately started running to see what happened. The headmaster stood with his arms locked in place and shouted, "I didn't ask anyone to come here except for this strange little boy." He was hoping the teacher would listen to him talk about his very young grandson's friend, someone who had to be completely different from everyone else. We saw our hero make him think back at his youth because he was thinking about himself then. Though he didn't say anything about the problem, he suddenly asked if the boy really knew what happened. If the boy were truly so gifted, how could anyone apply himself alone? It couldn't have been just him. There must have been something wrong with him entirely. Ogenen's eyes shut down immediately as he realized the truth. This wasn't the kind of person who would be proud to claim such a large body as their own. That moment made the headmaster look surprised as he saw that young man staring at him. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice tight. Ogent felt like he was suddenly thrown back in time to see all the things about his hero that had been waiting for him on this day. It was a very smart little boy with skills for an adult, but the moment Ogent stepped up and told him it wasn't time to settle down, he said nothing. Even Ogent laughed, wondering if anyone would actually want to be called noble. The headmaster smiled instantly, knowing his student had finally learned to see cause and effect for real. Ogent knew most people didn't understand the truth, so he got lost in his own head instead. It's hard to believe that new opportunities could arise if someone gives up all their old ways and sticks to nothing at all. My friend, if the brave man who stood up for his beliefs had ever seen our younger days before him, you'd know exactly how much we loved those times too. The headmaster wondered how some students saw him as a threat. While one group cheered his beliefs were true, another hated him because of exactly the same thing. A long silence stretched around him as he suddenly remembered what happened before. Owen stepped forward and looked at the boy, wondering how long since he had truly forgave his own past failures. Even though she had spent years teaching brilliant minds away from the mistakes they made, she still couldn't shake the weight of those regrets left behind. After guiding so many talented students, wasn't it time to let that guilt go? The headmaster told Ogent that his arrogance didn't matter because his students were learning from him and wouldn't ever become him themselves. If your hero truly looked like him, you'd know exactly why the fate wouldn't change. Then Alphys' great intellect was enough to save him from falling down the same pit. He was known in the town as the light for the Milch family, but a single careless mistake almost crushed his dream of becoming a successful headmaster. Yet, despite the setback, he managed to rise and found himself returning home. The headmaster slammed his fist on the desk and laughed, thinking Ogent was going to be a serious minister next to him. Even though his heart raced a little bit, he made a funny comment about how scared the kingdom of Tormia really is for tomorrow. The headmaster rolled his eyes as Ogent whispered to the crowd, "This must have been fate because you already knew your own story." It was a terrifying realization as the child she thought had disappeared for years ago suddenly returned to her arms. And now, the one who had vanished long ago is simply sitting right here for the rest of the day. He looked at the boy with a deep sigh, saying it wasn't just about fate. It was clear that his gift had been permanently shut down for 4 years because he was born in a special place. So the boy stood right up there, and if fate didn't play his hand, what would happen next? Finally, the headmaster looked at Ogent and announced that he had decided to accept Shireen. It took 3 more months for the world to finally wake up after winter had left behind. Now 17-year-old Leo stood in the corner of the train carriage, clutching his bag like it held his only true family. It was a big day for everyone, even though the boy asked how he looked. His dad had a sudden yawn and shouted, "Did you forget anything?" while Sharon grinned, wondering why his uncle was acting like he just told him to get back off his bike. Sharon kept shaking his head until his dad finally did that thing with a kiss on the top of his head and promised to make him perfect. He said it because he believed in him. Sharon then asked if everything at home would really be okay since the family head had offered to find them a house in the city. But his father was proud to be a hunter and said he'd manage in the mountains. He'd already accepted that even if he refused Ogent family support, they'd force help on them anyway. Sharon had thought getting into